Are you guys sitting down for this one? Are you okay? Are you breathing? How's your heart? Check the Apple Watch. Do an ECG test real quick because we got some new information about the iPad Air 4 today. There's some good news, some bad news, some weird news, and I don't really know how to feel about it. So without further ado, let's begin. So we've got a leak on our hands once again. Remember leaks? Remember what those are? This one is apparently showcasing the paperwork of an unreleased version of the iPad Air, which is showcasing that it's going to look kind of similar to what we've talked about in previous videos, a dumbed down version of the 11-inch iPad Pro from 2018. Though there is something very noticeably different about this iPad in its paperwork and what the text is referring to, which is written in Spanish, but thankfully we have technology now so we can figure out what those words mean, because as we all know, literally no one on earth speaks Spanish. But there is no Face ID sensor on this iPad. No, in fact, there's not even a home button on this iPad design. However, there is still Touch ID, and apparently it's embedded in the power button on the top. So yeah, if you look in really closely at this paperwork, you can see that the power button is a little bit elongated. It's longer than the volume buttons, which is absolutely different than what we have on our iPad Pros today. On our iPad Pros, the power button, volume buttons, they're the same size. So this is a very minute detail. And also, if we take a look at the back of the iPad Air in this paperwork, there's no flash, which means that at first glance, a lot of people are thinking, oh, someone could just take iPad Pro paperwork and kind of take some crappy pictures of it, post it online, and therefore claim it's the iPad Air. But in reality, that icon would not be in the 2018 iPad Pro paperwork because, of course, iPad Pros, even from 2018, had the flash on the back. And what doesn't have the flash on the back? Well, the current iPad Air 3. So from the get-go, let me just say none of this is confirmed. It's completely possible that this is fake. Someone could just make these icons, print them out, take a picture of them. However, if this is a fake, they did a really good job. I must say, this is a really good fake for them to pay attention to that kind of close detail when it comes to the back of the iPad, making the camera on the back look like it's flush with the iPad design, like Apple did with the iPad Air 3. And if we take a close look at the lettering, it appears that this, of course, would be rocking USB-C, which does also mean Apple Pencil 2 compatibility, which is great. Also, the smart connectors on the back, and likely because this is the 11-inch iPad design, it's going to be compatible with the Magic Keyboard case that you can buy with your iPad Pro today, which, if this product does exist, it is kind of cool to know that there would finally be like a $500 iPad that you could get the Apple Pencil, get the Magic Keyboard case, and still be sub $1,000 and still have this really great, iPad OS powered 2-in-1 device. Now, when it comes to Touch ID being on the power button, I know it sounds weird and it's very hard to believe, but frankly, I gotta admit, even if this is fake, just speculating the idea of adding Touch ID via the power button, that would put a pretty decent gap between where the iPad Air sits and where the iPad Pro sits. As we've talked about the iPad Air 4 for months now, we've always been alluding to the fact that, well, you can't make the iPad Air too good because then no one's gonna want to buy the iPad Pro, so you have to make it bad enough that it's, an improvement over the Air 3, but at the same time not going to butcher the sales of the current iPad Pros. I don't expect new iPad Pros to come out by the end of this year. I still think we gotta wait till 2021 for those, but there have been new iPad filings in the Eurasian database, and John Prosser, who's very good at giving us information on when Apple's gonna refresh their website and drop new hardware, he's saying we should expect new iPads on the second week of September, starting around September 7th, and typically Apple only does website refreshes on Monday through Wednesday, so it's possible we could see this new iPad Air 4 between September 7th and September 9th, literally just a couple weeks away from now. And at the end of the day, if Apple wanted to preserve the sales of the iPad Pro, not including Face ID on the iPad Air 4 would probably be a pretty good way to do it. However, this does completely discredit that earlier leak this year that was claiming the Air 4 would have Touch ID built into the display. Maybe that was a prototype of some kind, but this leak does not encourage that at all. And it comes from kind of a underrated leaker who goes by the name of Duan Ri. I apologize if I'm getting that wrong, but not that many people have talked about him in the past, and I scrolled through some of his older tweets. He's actually gotten quite a bit accurate. In fact, before the iPad Pros came out, he tweeted proof that Apple had already updated their website with the new iPads, and he even, like a month in advance, tweeted a photo of the iPhone SE, calling it the iPhone 9 back then, but it looks to be exactly right. Like, it's the right finish of white, and it had the Apple logo centered on the back, and we never saw it. No one ever talked about it. It only got like 6 likes. Like, no one really knows about this guy, and yet if you scroll through what he's tweeted in the past, it all ended up being pretty accurate. So I'm kind of inclined to believe this leak. It sounds believable to me. Yes, someone could go through all the hard work of making this pamphlet, but the fact that even the pieces of paper have the rounded corners and stuff like that, I'm just trying to imagine some type of sick psychopath that's trying to get on all of these tech YouTubers videos, cutting the edges of the paper so that it looks more accurate. I mean, again, not impossible that someone could do it, but what I will say is what we have learned from this leak of it being, again, probably a 60 hertz LCD display, no Face ID but Touch ID on an elongated power button, and of course Apple Pencil 2 compatibility, USB-C, hopefully still quad speakers, and when it comes to the CPU, that's really kind of the big debate here. I could see it going multiple ways, but it sounds like something Apple would do. I'll just be completely honest with you here. This sounds like an iPad Air 4 that Apple would release. Saying like, okay, it doesn't have Face ID, that's going to be considered a Pro feature, but you can now have access to these accessories that Apple loves selling for $300, $120 between the pencil and the keyboard, and now you've got gesture control so you can swipe up and feel like you're using an iPad Pro, but not have to spend iPad Pro money. I kind of believe it. I can kind of get behind that. It sounds realistic to me. It's just, we don't really know what the processor will be. I've seen some people say the iPad Air will get the A14 chip, but I have a hard time believing that, because why would Apple release the A14 chip on an iPad Air before releasing the iPhones? iPhones are still not rumored to come out until October, so that would be somewhat bizarre, though I guess there's a lot of firsts in 2020. Some people are suggesting it would get the A13 chip, which is partially believable because, you know, it's not quite as good as the A12Z when it comes to GPU performance. However, it would be kind of weird because the A13 chip can outperform the A12Z in single core performance. Would Apple want a cheaper iPad with a faster processor in certain aspects than the Pro iPad? I'm not too sure. In my opinion, it makes the most sense that the Air 4 would have a really, really competitive starting price of like $500, but it would still be rocking the A12 chip of the current iPad Air because Apple has used the same processors on 2 generations of iPad before. And I know a lot of you are thinking the budget iPad 8 is getting the A12 chip soon, but the truth is, if this iPad Air leak is real, then this iPad Air has a whole lot of advantages over that budget iPad, besides, you know, the A12 chip might be the same on this one. So you'd get the gesture control, you'd get the updated design language, you'd get USB-C, Apple Pencil 2 keyboard support, which does mean using the cursor and trackpad would be a lot easier compared to budget iPad, which will still be rocking the home button, the thicker bezels, Lightning, and Apple Pencil 1 support. So I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if both the budget iPad and the iPad Air had the A12 chip. We can go around on this subject in circles all day. A lot of people think, well, they must be refreshing the iPad Pro really shortly then too. I still have a hard time believing that, but overall, the most disappointing part of this leak is having Touch ID on the power button. It just sounds inconvenient. I love the idea of opening up my iPad and it instantly just unlocks because it recognizes my face, or when I'm using the keyboard case, I can just tap the space bar and it looks at me and unlocks. It's so much easier and more simple that way, and Apple's never done Touch ID on a power button before, so that's the only fishy thing about this leak. But I guess if you want to adopt iPad Pro design language, but you don't want to butcher the iPad Pro, this might be a good way to do it. I just hate the idea of having to reach out and touch the side of the iPad every time you want to unlock it, especially because when using it with the keyboard case, it's kind of up in the top left corner of the iPad. That doesn't feel ergonomic. It doesn't feel convenient. So I could totally understand why a lot of you may have been excited for the Air 4, but now after hearing this report, you're like, well, I might just as well go with the 2018 iPad Pro at this point. Save yourself some money, get the Pro Motion display, get Face ID because it's so much easier to unlock. I kind of can get behind that. So what do you guys think? Is this leak fake or real? Could Apple be releasing an Air 4 like this? Feel free to let me know. This is your Apple Chip here. I'll see you in the next one.